Welcome to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Rose, and this podcast exists to help illuminate the path ahead of you. With expert interviews, clinical pearls, and real client success stories, my intention is to bring you hope for what's possible on this journey and to give you tools and resources to navigate the ups and downs on the road before you. If you find this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And I have a big request. If you have a minute, can you leave us a 5-star review? And let us know, what did you learn? What did you come away with? Did you leave with that spark of hope? This helps more people like you find the podcast. My mission is to support as many humans as possible on their path to become parent. And by you sharing and subscribing, you're part of that mission too. And I'm so grateful for you for being here. Hi guys. This topic was very requested, and it is not an easy topic at first, but it's something that I find can really make or break the fertility journey. And this is surrender. I'm going to start with a quote from a book that one of my mentors had recommended several months ago. And it was definitely a necessary read for me, and I hope that it brings you some enlightenment around surrender as well. The book is called Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender, written by Dr. David Hawkins. And here's the quote. "The mechanism of surrender is simple, and the truth is self-evident. It works during daily life. There is no dogma or belief system. You verify everything for yourself, so you cannot be misled. There is no dependence on any teachings. It follows the dicta of know thyself. The truth shall set you free, and the kingdom of God is within you. It works for the cynic, the pragmatist, the religionist, and the atheist. It works for any age or cultural background. It works for the spiritual person and the non-spiritual person alike. Because the mechanism is your own. Nobody can take it away from you. You are safe from disillusionment. You will find out for yourself what is real and what are just the mind's programs and belief systems. While all of this is going on, you will become healthier, more successful, with less effort, happier, and more capable of real love. Your friends will notice a difference. The changes are permanent. You aren't going to go for a high and crash later. You will discover that there is an automatic teacher within yourself." Holy shit, that sounds pretty good, right? I think we all want that. We all want to know thyself. We all want this to feel more effortless, this life we are lifing. Why does it feel so hard sometimes? When we want something, when we wanted it on a certain timeline, it's not going our way. Seems like it'd be really nice to surrender. So why does it feel so hard? Why does the ego want to fight this? And this is where so much of the basis of my work has gone for the last several years, last 3 to 4 years, in studying the unconscious and becoming certified in hypnosis and using neurolinguistic programming. And yet it can be so much simpler even than all of that. This practice of surrender can be this moment-to-moment practice that lives within you. And like the quote says, it is your own. No one can take it from you. How empowering does that sound? Sounds pretty good, right? We're going to sell you on surrender by the end of this. But this idea of letting go, I think so many people assume that letting go, surrendering, may feel like giving up. It may feel like saying, never mind, this isn't important to me, I'm letting it go. And that doesn't feel true to me. To me, the process of letting go means you're simply releasing the attachment to this outcome that you actually had no control over anyway. And in releasing the control over that outcome, you're freeing up all of this energy for other possibilities. the process of letting go of negative emotions is opening up all of this space for bringing in more joy, more peace, more satisfaction, more fulfillment. I'm going to tell a couple of stories because I think this will help you see how surrender can actually be practical and what outcomes might this lead to if we allow ourselves to surrender. So, story time. The first story I'm going to tell about a client, one of our Brilliant Fertility Program clients. She came to me, this would have been about January of 2023 initially. She'd recently had a miscarriage and she was really struggling to move in a forward direction. There was a lot of mistrust of her body after this. She didn't necessarily feel that she was holding on to a lot of grief or anger, but as we talked more, there was a lot of fear within that mistrust, a lot of fear about what her body was capable of, and fear of running out of time. So she was starting to explore the option of working with a reproductive endocrinologist and what that would look like. And even that process was bringing up so much fear. Getting test results back would bring so much anxiety because what if something was wrong? I think there was a lot of catastrophizing. There was a lot of deep cynicism about her body, and I would also say hyper criticism of her body, the level to which she tracked everything from her basal body temperatures, using daily urine collections to see what her hormones were doing at different times, tracking how much calories, protein, fats, carbohydrates. She was looking at her macros really closely. She believed that everything had to be perfect in order for her to conceive. And there's just so much internal stress surrounding everything related to fertility and her body. So actually, when we first consulted, she was still feeling unsure about what her next step would be. She decided I'm going to just sit with information for a while before I decide what I'm going to do. And then about 3 months later, she reached out and she said, you know what, I'm feeling pulled towards the Brilliant Fertility Program, and let's go ahead and jump in and see what that's going to feel like. And initially all of her questions were very wrapped up in what can I do? What can I do? What should I do next? And, as a practitioner who's been working in this world for 11 years, I could feel that tension around all of the doing things perfectly. And even just the way in which she would ask questions, if she had to miss a group call, she would submit her questions and I would record my answers for her. But I could even tell in just the tone in which the questions were written, how much fear and mistrust there was in herself. So for this particular client, instead of suggesting that we'll add more tracking, get more accountable for how you are consuming your protein and your vegetables, I actually suggested that what would it feel like if we started to let go of tracking? What would it feel like if you started to just ask your body what would feel good to eat right now? And noticing how that impacted energy and overall well-being versus having to meet this certain milestone of the 30 grams of protein at each meal and being really wrapped up in it. And then if she didn't meet it, having a lot of feelings around that. And it took a few months. This is a 4-month program for a reason, but it took her about 2.5 months to finally say, I might be ready to let go of some of this. We actually did a process for her of releasing a belief that she had to do everything perfectly and installing a new belief that she trusted herself, that she was actually doing enough. and that everything that she was doing was having a cumulative positive influence, and she could let go of perfectionism. And through that process, she started to just be more mindful of how she felt upon waking, instead of starting her day with the immediate jumping into taking her temperature, peeing in a stick, and seeing what her hormones were doing, but just pausing for 5 minutes and breathing and saying, what do I need today? And she stopped tracking her cycle altogether. She would put when her period started, and that was it. She started being able to travel with more ease. Previously, travel was something that was really difficult for her because she found it hard to meet what her perceived dietary goals needed to be. She was able to let go of that so that she could just enjoy being somewhere new and enjoying the foods that were there. And she had previously also been really anxious about what the next step were with a reproductive endocrinologist. And as she let go of tracking, and as she let go of having to do everything perfectly, she started to feel more spaciousness and more ease around the idea of what that next step would be with working with a reproductive endocrinologist again. She had had so much anxiety before, wrapped up in what her AMH and her FSH levels had been like, that she'd been avoiding making that appointment because she was like, I know they're going to want to do that day 3 testing again, and I'm so anxious about what those numbers are. And so again, we did some work around, releasing the fear. We did a lot of EFT tapping around releasing that body criticism. And she was just about to go do those tests when she found out she was pregnant. And it came as such a surprise to her because at that point it had been a year since her miscarriage, and she wasn't expecting to be able to conceive without assistance at that point. She had already sort of made the assumption that she would need to do IUI or IVF. She was actually gearing up for pursuing IVF. And being able to rebuild that trust in herself is something she believes allowed her to open up and be receptive and conceive without assistance. Now, part of my journey of surrender as a practitioner is to basically release my own outcomes, release my responsibility for patient outcomes. Like, I can only meet people halfway. I can't do the work for them. I can give information. I can use the tools I have to help them let go. But whether it was just having time for healing, whether it was just like, this is when this soul is meant to come in, I always believe that. Whether if it was her release of the perfectionism, releasing the tracking, I don't know what did the trick. Like, I've released enough ego around that. Like, I don't know what allowed her to conceive easily without assistance. I'm happy for her, but I've also realized as a practitioner that there are certain things that we as providers have had to release. And I talked about this a little bit in the episode about naturopathic medicine and how it can help fertility, and what to look for in a provider, and ultimately, looking for providers who aren't inserting their own ego into their medical practice, which might be challenging to come by sometimes. We all have ego, but ego is why it can feel so hard to surrender. The ego doesn't like change. The ego wants to resist change. It's trying to protect you from change, even if you know that growing and changing and transformation would help you. So, the funny little things that the ego will do to resist change are actually good signs to me, like, okay, we're moving in the right direction here. So I loved her story. I'll share my current personal story of where I've had to practice a lot of surrender. Some of you may know this. Some of you, this story is going to be probably a little bit surprising if you've been following me for a while, but I haven't shared this on social media or in my email yet. So I'm actually in the process of going out into solo practice. I've been employed by the same larger practice for 10 years now. It's most of my years practicing. I spent my first year in practice in just a generalized internal medicine naturopathic practice. And the last 10 years, I've worked in the same place with a lot of the same people who are absolutely wonderful. It's felt like a nest to grow in. And for maybe 5 years of that, I have felt this pull, this tug to go out and create something different and create a space where, my local population who is struggling with fertility has more resources for themselves, but also this space for safe transformation. Because so much of the work that I do with people is about releasing trauma, removing stigma around hard things, growing and changing and transforming into the person that you want to be. And that takes a certain environment in which the energy is intentional, and the people who are working in that environment are also doing the work on themselves. And so I've had this vision for a long, long time. And the past year, really, asking questions of myself differently and the universe differently, and praying and meditating and allowing things to fall into place, and realizing, especially after my mom's heart attack earlier this summer, that if I was not aligning my actions with this greater vision, that I was always going to feel this kind of stuck disappointment. So I decided that it was time. This year is the year this is happening. But of course, there's these little pieces of the ego that are like, are you sure about this? Can you really trust yourself to do this? This is a big deal. Like, what if you fail? All the ego questions, all of the worst case scenario. And I had to decide, my dream for this is bigger than my fear. So we're in this process of literally building a building from the ground up. We bought land, we got architectural plans, we went through several applications with banks to get approved for a small business loan to help this happen. And the synchronicities of this process have been really wild. Also the level of perceived failures has been very interesting. So the number of rejections that we got, I say we because my husband is involved in this project with me, because it will involve growing his physical therapy practice too. So the number of rejections that we got was, 4 or 5, to the point where we're like, should we be doing this? Is this really a good idea? All the ego questions started, all the fears started coming in pretty hot. And then I would, come back to myself, come back to the meditations that I find the most access to higher self and source, and asking questions and guidance, and finding the people who are meant to help us. And, eventually having things approved in such a way that all right, we're able to start building. And gosh, if anyone has ever built something or had opportunities to work with construction and contractors, that stuff all just goes slowly. And then it was not without more hiccups, because we've had some pretty big storms here in Tucson. So in the first couple months of building, actually the steel framing for my husband's side of the building was completely ripped up and twisted in this storm we had that had 80-mile-per-hour winds. The contractor was like, gosh, in 25 years of working, I've never seen this happen. So there already, we're like, okay, is this a sign from the universe, or is it just a sign to surrender, let go, trust that we're meant to do this and keep going? Meanwhile, I've already put in the notice at my practice, and they've hired someone else to come in and take over the space that I'm in the next couple of weeks. I sign a lease on a temporary space that on paper is perfect. It's got a great energy. It has everything that I would need to be able to continue practicing acupuncture and serving my patients well. And I sign the lease, and 2 weeks later, that whole first floor of that building floods up to like here. If you're listening to me, I am holding my hand about 4 feet in the air, flooded in such a way that they had to rip out all the drywall. I mean, from what I hear, it's just completely gutted. New floors, new cabinetry are needed. They originally told me that they expected it to take 3 weeks, and I kind of thought, okay, well, I've been experiencing this construction world long enough. I don't know if that's an accurate number, but I'll add a couple weeks on to what I think that might be. And then I hear back from them last week, oh, it's actually going to be 8 more weeks because we need these specific cabinets. And it's just like, okay, goodness, am I like, all the fears start coming in. Am I going to have a place to see my patients? Like, especially with acupuncture, like, is that something I could do via, like, is there any other method? Like, I really was spiraling out a bit. And so I finally come to an acknowledgement, like, there is a space I can use. It may not be ideal, but I can make it, I can be intentional with the energy there in such a way that will still provide my patients the environment required for healing. It's still possible. I can learn how to be flexible here. That's part of my own surrendering, is I have not been historically known as a person who does well with change. And oh my gosh, there's so much change happening. So I decide, like, all right, I can be flexible with this. I have high standards around this still. I'm not just throwing in the towel to say I'll practice anywhere. I am being very intentional. This will not come from an energy of desperation. This is coming from an energy of high standards for calm, abundance, the frequency of love. And that is ultimately what's required. So I drive up to the space where I'm hoping that I can create that energy to serve my acupuncture patients. Happens to be right across the parking lot from where this new building is that we're building, that meanwhile they've taken down the twisted steel and they had started putting up walls, and it's all coming together. But I hadn't seen it in a couple weeks, and we're driving up there, and my husband is like, oh my God, did you just see what I think we saw? And we pull up, and an entire, like, this huge wall that had been framed out, and the plywood had been applied. Essentially, like, the entire exterior of the building had been completed. This entire wall was blown down. And all I could do was laugh. My kids were like, has mom lost her mind? Has she gone a little cray? And my husband I don't know if I've ever seen him look more demoralized in his entire life. But it was just like this great reminder of, like, and here we surrender again. I can't control the weather. There's so many things that I can't control the outcome of, but I can hold the energy of high standards and unconditional love and trust in myself and the vision that I have for what this can be, and that we keep going. And there is a book that I read that, of course, I'm spacing on the name of it right now, but it's essentially about negotiations. It's written by a hostage negotiator, and one of the premises of negotiations is that the most flexible party will always win. So I am learning how to be flexible while holding high standards. I am learning how to surrender. And if you're asking the question of like, how do I surrender though? Like, it sounds great in theory. Like, I'd love to have that personal power. I'd love to get that freedom. I'd love for things to feel easier. I can't tell you exactly how to surrender. I mean, you can definitely read the book. Ultimately, for me, and what's allowed me to move through these, almost ridiculous situations, just one after another, without losing a night of sleep about it, which 5 years ago me, I would have lost a lot of sleep over this. 10 years ago me, I probably wouldn't have slept in the last month. I'm sleeping great, guys. Like, I can tell you, surrender is a really healthy practice for sleep. Ultimately, for me, it's a moment to moment practice. And it's like building this muscle so that when the seemingly bigger things occur, you already have that foundation. Ultimately, the practices I include in the Brilliant Fertility Program boil down to allowing for this surrender. So building trust in yourself, building trust in your body, knowing that even if things don't go exactly as planned on the timeline you planned, you are fucking resilient and you can live a really beautiful life. I believe that. I have seen it to be true over and over and over. I'm using it in my own life, and I hope that this message, that it's possible to let go, and that in the letting go, you are freeing up all this energy to create a life that you love. I hope that's coming through here. Let me know how you are feeling about surrender. What questions does this bring up for you? What resistance does your brain have around wanting to surrender? And we can continue this conversation. I'm sending you guys so much love. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all of you who have continued to support this podcast. If you can take a moment right now, it takes about 5 seconds on Spotify and Apple to leave 5 stars. If you want to take 45 seconds to leave a review on Apple, it means so much to me. And it helps this podcast grow. It helps other people find this podcast. So if you feel like there are more people in the world who need to surrender and come out of their ego, then please review, give us 5 stars, share this with a friend, and let me know what questions come up around surrender for you, because I'm right there with you.